Hello and welcome to the Star City Games Invitational Qualifier. The format is standard and we're in sunny Doncaster, England. This is round 3 coverage of Lee Parker against Jack Mitchell-Burns, and here's Boomer to tell you what they're playing.
We've got Lee Parker on the left, who's playing a pretty standard Jun deck. It's pretty much just a normal mid-range deck, good cards deck essentially. It's got Thragtusk, Farseek, Rakdos Returns, Olivia Volgar, and just a collection of some of the best cards that you can get in standard in a mid-range deck. Jack Mitchell-Burns is playing a Angel Reanimator deck, which is based on Yuji Okita's Grand Prix Nagoya deck, but Jack's decided to not play green in the deck, missing out on cards like Mulch and Grizzly Salvage and also Huntmaster of the Fells, and instead he's opted to go blue, white, red with a splash of black, obviously, for Unburial Rites, and he's put cards like Dream Twist in there and has a slightly more combo-y feel to his Human Reanimator deck overall, rather than the more chromatic style deck, which has a little bit more grind to it. We've just seen a Rakdos key rune come out of Lee there. That's probably about the only key rune from Return to Ravnica which has actually seen play in this format, but it's certainly a very good one. 3/1 first strike pretty much means it beats up most relevant things in combat on the ground. So, and a lot of people are very loath to use a removal spell on it. I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect on this game due to the fact that Jack's running 4 as its Staticasters, so that key rune's very rarely going to get to attack.
So what's the general strategy for both of these decks once they know what they're up against? What's their route to victory?
Jun's main route to victory is simply turning creatures sideways, occasionally with a large Rakdos Returns in there somewhere. Jack's route to victory is to reanimate an Angel of Glory's Rise, which when it comes into play you exile all zombies and you return all humans from your graveyard to play. So when Jack does that with the Angel, here's a Thragtusk from Lee Parker. It won't be the last time we see one of those today for sure. When Jack does reanimate the Angel of Glory's Rise, he's going to put cards like Geist on a Monk and Zealous Conscripts into play, which will allow him to form a really huge hasted monster. The other side, the other card that he could have to work with at this point is Gold Knight Commander, which has an ability that whenever another creature comes into play, all creatures you control gain +1/+1, and obviously if you're bringing 8 creatures in at once, it just creates an absolutely incredibly huge army, a lot of it with haste, and you just trample over the borders and lay waste to your opponent at that point.
And pray the other guy doesn't have a fog.
Yeah, pretty much, but Fog hasn't been a very widely played card in a long period of time unless you're Travis Wu and you're playing Omnifire.
So what are we seeing now? How's the board developed?
Well, Jack doesn't generally put a lot of board presence in play in the first few turns. He's fairly open. He spent the first few turns casting Dream Twist, casting Faithless Looting, just filling up his graveyard as best he can. Lee's putting the pressure on here. He's just attacked for 8, putting Jack down to 10.
So, you know, pretty much giving him another turn if we're assuming Lee's got some kind of burn spell.
Yeah, but here comes the Angel of Glory's Rise, and with its trigger you can see that four creatures have come back from Jack's bin. That's not as big as it could have been, but it's certainly a decent sized army that's come into play. I think Jack had probably preferred one of those Is It Staticasters to be something like a Gold Knight Commander or another Geist Honored Monk. But unfortunately he's just got to deal with what he has. That Geist Honored Monk's 7/7 at this point, and Jack's just deciding what he's going to do with his Zealous Conscripts. Usually just used to steal your opponent's Thragtusk and hit him in the face with it, but at this point I think that Jack's probably going to be better off. Yeah, he's given his Geist on a Monk haste and he's going to attack for 10, pretty much putting Lee on a very short term clock at this point. apart from the fact that it looks like Lee's got an ultimate price. Yeah, there we go. So he's only going to take 3 from that attack, and Jack's board at this point isn't really that impressive. The Angel's still fairly big, but the rest of his creatures aren't going to pose Lee a huge threat.
You can keep his Lee's key rune switched off, but that's about it with the Staticasters. They
Yeah.
don't really do a whole lot else.
I mean, he can block it. He can block the Thragtusk with a Spirit and shoot it with the Staticasters as well. But
And this was largely why the green version seemed to just be that little bit better with the death touch that it could bring in.
yeah, with Nightshade Peddler, if it's paired with an Izzet Staticaster, the Izzet Staticaster basically just becomes a Terminate on legs. But the problem is that combo, it's one of those things where standard currently is a little bit.
Well, it works very well against all of the mid-range that currently seems to be about the place everywhere.
It does. It's very good against mid-range. Where it's not so good really is against I say it's not so good against some of the weenie decks like Rakdos Aggro and Red Deck Wins.
Well, the Staticaster by itself is fine against the weenie decks.
Yeah, so you probably.
And the Peddler is just there to give it the sort of the mid-range and the sort of the fatties to take them out.
Yeah, because obviously if you're a burn deck or something like that, you're pretty loath to use a burn spell on a 1/1 that just gives death touch when it soul bonds with something. It might be one of those factors that standard's moved as much as it has over the last few years. There's a lot more mid-range in the environment now, people trying to be good against everything, and the Staticaster Death Touch combo really punishes those sort of decks.
Well, we've certainly found that in the UK over the last month, 2 months, that the mid-range decks have been, I don't know, for want of a better phrase, more mid-range. They're just trying to out-mid-range each other.
Yes, pretty much on that point. There's been a distinct lack, certainly at the tournaments I've been at over the last few months. There's been a bit of a lack of decks which sort of commit to one side, either just trying to beat you in the first 4 turns if you're a Red Deck Win player, or say being a bank control deck where you want to win on turn 30, or whether your opponent's fallen asleep.
So Lee's got old Olivia out here.
Yeah, Olivia's bad news for Jack here. I mean, she's gonna shoot down all the spirit tokens. I think Jack there was trying desperately to bait Lee to use Olivia so that he could outstack it with the two Staticasters, but Lee didn't fall for that, and he's going to be able to untap with his Olivia and pretty much dominate the board at this point.
So Olivia's a 3/3.
Yep, 3/3 currently, but I think she's going to get an awful lot bigger at this point. Whenever she shoots something, she gets a +1/+1 counter. And the other thing that Lee can potentially do as well, once he gets up to 7 mana, he can just start stealing Jack's creatures. And without the Nightshade Peddler in his deck, Jack's going to have a very hard time interacting with an Olivia once it starts going.
It's definitely been a popular strategy in the past, really, to just sort of build your own deck and completely ignore your opponents.
Yeah. One thing that I'm looking at here for Olivia's another one of these cards which dominates mid-range decks. Against the completely like nightmarish aggro deck, she's pretty much too slow. She'll just die to a Searing Spear. Against the sort of big control deck, she's probably not fast enough to actually put a relevant clock on the opponent. But against mid-range decks, she just owns the board completely. Jack's milled a Gold Knight Commander there into his graveyard. What he was looking for there, I believe, was probably another Angel of Glory's Rise to go with it, because at that point he can giant growth his entire team and just swing for the fences. But I think that without that, Jack's going to struggle a bit to come back into this game. If Lee ends up with another land next turn, he can just simply take control of the Angel and swing through with the...
Third Staticaster might have helped him as well, getting rid of the Thragtusk.
Yeah.
Bit extreme, that, really.
It is a bit, really. And if Leon taps with 6 mana in play, he can just shoot the Staticaster and make Olivia an absolutely enormous creature. Jack's triggering Chronic Flooding there. Again, I think he's looking for an Angel of Glory. That's a terrible mill. It's like just gets him a faithless looting, and that's pretty much it. That's really not what he was looking for here.
For those wondering, Jack isn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt.
No, he is. He is inked up quite nice, but it looks at this point like he's not going to be able to find a way back into this, and he'll be a bit disappointed about that, because I have a distinct feeling the Angel Reanimator deck's a pretty big favourite game one, but the Jun deck is going to come back into it post-board, I believe. So for Jun to take game one, Jack might be facing a little bit of an uphill struggle to pull two straight here.
Both of these decks are 2-0 at the moment, so they've obviously had some success already.
Yeah, and as I said, Jack's deck's going to prey a lot on sort of the mid-range kind of decks. Also, because he's playing Angel of Glory's Rise, he will also be fairly decent against the Rakdos aggro style decks, because on turn 4 he just wipes his opponent's board and brings in a load of his own creatures. So Hellrider's not so scary when it's the only creature you've got in play at that point.
Yeah, it's important to remember it kills all the zombies. It's like just a little up.
Yeah, and since that's pretty much all Rakdos aggro does for the first 3 turns, it's definitely a very nice side effect of the card, although it's not entirely what it's for. I guess the other decks that Jack's going to be fairly happy to see, he won't be unhappy to see Bank Control, really, because with the fact that all he has to fight through really with Bank Control is 4 Dissipates, and the Wrath of Gods that his opponents play in those decks just aren't going to be a huge amount of trouble for him.
Yeah, because you're beating up on the turn your stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
You're not giving them a chance to cast a sorcery.
Exactly. And the other thing is that the Bank Control player can sometimes feel like, oh, all I need to do is save my Dissipates for the Unburial Rites, but that's really not true, because Jack goes through his deck at such a huge rate that he can pretty much outdraw Sphinx's Revelation. So he will just be finding threats quicker than the Bank Control deck will. But at this point he hasn't found enough, and Lee Parker's going to take game 1. And
well, he has taken game 1, so join us on the next video for game 2.